being like in the room with the guys in Incubus, and we've been rehearsing for a tour that we have coming up here. Our first show is on Friday, and there's just nothing like it. Like turning up the amps, singing at the top of your lungs. Letting music kind of move through you, and even when you're writing too, and you don't know exactly what you're playing, but then just letting stuff just flow out of you. It's like you're being happily possessed.
Hey guys, James Wilson Taylor here for Rock Sound. It's the latest of our video calls. Now, Incubus frontman Brandon Boyd has just released his brand new solo album. I'm delighted to say that here to tell us all about it is Brandon himself. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad. Lovely to see you. And yeah, an exciting time to talk to you. Like we say, Echoes and Cocoons, the new solo record, has just kind of dropped at the time of recording here. So let's start in a place that I imagine a lot of fans might be asking at the minute is, you've obviously done some solo material before, but it's been a minute. It's been a few
Mm.
years. So what prompted the decision? Was this a pandemic project, or did you feel just this was the right moment, the right time to revisit that kind of thing again?
This was absolutely a pandemic project. I, like so many other people out there, found myself in the very strange position of being stuck at home. And when I find myself stuck anywhere, I end up just writing. It's sort of a way that I have made sense of the world throughout my life. And so I was painting a lot, I was writing a lot, and I was recording like covers that were interesting to me. I felt like it was going to be like a month. Remember that moment in time when it was like,
Oh,
it's like 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and it was like a month to flatten the curve. And
yeah.
this was quite a handful of months into proper lockdown, and with no foreseeable end to it in sight. And had a couple of ideas that I really liked, and I the part of me really wanted to kind of bubble up with the guys in Incubus and write a record there with them, but the priorities were sort of kind of diverging. Some of the guys in the band have kids, and um, everyone's sort of position around it was a little bit different, so it didn't quite sort of line up. But I reached out to John Congleton on kind of a cold call, for lack of a better way of saying it. And he was like, "Yeah, what's up?" I'm not doing anything either. So it seemed like the right opportunity.
Yeah, natural fit. I'm glad you mentioned John. That's a good place to kind of start in terms of the music of it, because I mean, such interesting stuff. If people don't know the name, I encourage you to go give it a little search, because chances are he's worked on a
Sure.
lot of people's favorite records over the last few years. Phoebe Bridgers and St. Vincent, to name a couple of kind of his big
Hmm.
recent collaborations. And I mean, you must have been a fan of his work, I guess. But that's interesting to hear. It was almost like a cold call. How well did you know John before this project? And had you worked much together before or anything?
I had never spoken to him
Brilliant.
once.
Love that.
If we had met, I don't think we had met ever, but if we'd met, it was like in passing, somewhere. But I don't think we even did that. It was kind of the product of having a daily ritual of sitting down and drinking tea with my girlfriend and listening to music. And we've been doing this for years, where if there's something that we really like, new or old, we'll sort of just like, check this out. And we kind of bounce stuff off of each other. She's a very musically inclined person, she was a ballerina for her entire life. And so she reads music, and she's probably a better musician than I am. She's just not like a professional musician. Um, but like, I'll write songs and show her. She's like, "Oh, that's a really interesting move you made there," and she'll explain to me what I had done. It's like one of those situations.
That's great.
So she played me a few things that he had produced, and I I've talked about this before, so anyone listening is hearing the same kind of story. I apologize, but it's definitely worth repeating. It, the projects that he had worked on, I listened to, uh, and I was absorbing them, and I really loved what I was hearing. But the very next sort of feeling and emotion on the heels of, "Oh, this is good," was almost like envy. It was like I was like jealous of how awesome it sounded, and I desperately needed to figure out like who produced the song we're listening to. And then we just, oh, John Congleton, and then again John Congleton. So I reached out to him in his DMs.
There you go.
It's
The modern
it's
way.
not just for inappropriate dating anymore. You can also
You can get the work done too, guys. This
you
is
can,
how it
yes.
works out, man, for sure. But what a fruitful collaboration there as well. And it's what I find interesting about this, and it's something that I think always works best whenever it's someone like yourself who's obviously known for being in a band and then going off and doing a solo project. You want to do something that's stretching a different creative muscle. You want to do something that sounds good, but you don't want to put out something that sounds exactly like an Incubus record. What would be the point? You'd go do that with the band. And this has
Yeah.
got such a more stripped back feel. Like there's almost like sort of Radiohead Tom Yorke type elements into this in terms of the production, the
Mm.
style, and everything. Tell me a little bit about what that musical approach was for you. I take it you must have at least consciously slightly thought, yeah, let's do something completely different from what I've been doing before, right?
Mm. There's, that's probably the only above ground ethos when going into solo projects is that I'm going to do everything in my power to differentiate this from Incubus. In a lot of ways, to out of respect for Incubus and to honor what Incubus has done. But in doing that, I'm presenting myself with one of the most intense creative challenges, though, because being like the singer and the melodicist, is that a word, and lyricist of Incubus, I'm kind of you. It's hard to separate like what I bring to the band. You know what I mean? It's like I could put my voice. I've learned over the years. This is like the third solo project I've done, and I've learned how hard it is to differentiate because it's my voice is sort of, for lack of a better way of describing it, kind of identifiable at this point. It's like I feel like it has a recognizable tone, and I have a recognizable way of writing. So going off into different directions it's hard for it not to sound sort of like Incubus light or something like that. And that's not what I want to do. I would love to continue to differentiate and create new pathways in music and in creativity. But the stuff that I was working with John, the way that he is producing and sort of the sonic atmospheres that we were kind of bouncing back and forth were so vastly different than anything that we've ever done as a band. It almost called out a different voice in me. And I also wasn't, I was in that kind of pandemic shape, so to speak, I like to, I'm a healthy person. So I do the bits to stay healthy and everything, but like your voice, if you're like a professional singer, if you don't use your voice in the ways that it's capable of, like when we go on tour and we're making music in the studio, that muscle tends to sort of dial back considerably. So there are moments where I was like, I'm gonna belt this one out right here, and it was just like, oh wow, this is hard all of a sudden. So I'm gonna try it more conversationally, and so most of the record came out a little bit more just the different tonalities in the voice, more conversational, I suppose, which I wasn't mad at all, because it also helps to differentiate. And it was kind of unintentionally calling on these other kind of less obvious influences for me over the years. I'm a huge Leonard Cohen fan. I'm a huge David Bowie fan. I love so many kinds of music, but the kind of music that I make with the guys in our band Incubus is what happens when the five of us put our heads together. It's and it comes out different than I think it would if just one of us was writing the stuff. So with John Congleton, it was just the two of us, and we were just bouncing these ideas back and forth. And might I add, it was remotely. We actually didn't
Oh,
meet.
wow.
We didn't
Yeah.
meet at all until the record was finished. We went and had a coffee together, and we were like, that was fun. Like, should we do it in the same room sometime? Like, we got a cool record doing it literally like this.
Yeah.
It was emailing ideas back and forth, FaceTiming, and something kind of great happened. I think so. I would love to make a record with him in the same room. I'd actually love for John to produce an Incubus record. I think it could be really special.
I think that'd be really, really interesting, man, for sure. I'd absolutely love to hear what that kind of produced with all you guys in there, for sure. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting you talk about the kind of remote recording thing because I've spoken, as you might imagine, over the last couple of years, so many artists who've been in that exact same situation by necessity. What
Mm-hmm.
did you feel like were the kind of plus points and negatives of that? Is it something you enjoyed? I guess it must have been a necessity, and obviously you've enjoyed the final result. But is it
Mm-hmm.
something that you would repeat again necessarily, or are you kind of wanting to get back in the room for that kind of
Mm.
situation again?
That's a really interesting question because there are ups. There is a plus side to doing things remotely. Um, there are less cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, and you get if you have a very pure idea in mind for whatever this meal that you're trying to concoct is supposed to be, you can get there probably a little more succinctly, a little more swiftly even. And we got this record kind of finished in pretty short order, um, from having never met and then having a mixed and mastered record. I think it was probably 5 or 6 months tops. Um, that period of time felt like it went on forever though, because we were also dealing with like the existential dread and stress of a global pandemic, just constantly every single day, multiple times a day, just getting these weird, little snippets of information through the media, which is a whole other topic. But like I said, there were some pluses to it. Definitely got to delve into my own weird little world, and in my mind, it was probably a lot closer to the way that I paint. When I paint
Right.
pictures, it's just me by myself in a room alone with the door open, listening to the sound of outside. And it's very kind of like meditative. So there were moments on writing this record that were like that. All that being said, there's nothing like being in the same room as people who you respect and admire when you're making music. It's viscerally, it's very, very different. And I dare I say almost necessary. So I've
Sure.
just being like in the room with the guys in Incubus, and we've been rehearsing for a tour that we have coming up here. Our first show is on Friday, and there's just nothing like it. Like turning up the amps, singing at the top of your lungs, letting music kind of move through you, and even when you're writing too, and you don't know exactly what you're playing, but then just letting stuff just flow out of you. It's like you're being happily possessed. It's a wonderful thing.
That's a good turn of phrase. Happily possessed. I like that. That's a good way of summing it up, man, for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Incubus rehearsals. Yeah, of course, you've got this big summer tour. I saw it got announced the other day. How has it been actually getting back in those rehearsals? Like you said before there, it takes a minute. It's a muscle, your voice. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
retrain it in that way. Obviously, these are songs that you're incredibly comfortable with and have played live a million times with the band, but did it come back easy or was there a little bit of a learning curve again now?
I was going to say incredibly comfortable might not be the best way to describe performing songs that we have played literally hundreds and hundreds of times. Um, some of them come right back, and there's really no rhyme or reason to it. Like there are songs that we haven't touched in 6 or 7 years, and we have like a master list in our studio. And sometimes we call it Incubus Challenge. I'll just sort of like, I'll say to the microphone, Incubus Challenge. I'll point to a song and everyone's like, oh, Jesus. Okay. And sometimes it's like we sound like we're like limping through a minefield. It just sounds awful. And then sometimes there's nothing wrong with it at all. You can't really predict how it's going to go. Um, all that being said, there's some extenuating factors that have made it really interesting over the past couple of years. Everybody else has their own things. We're all like in our mid 40s now. We've been a band for over 30 years. And so there are the kind of like predictable aches and pains that come with being in your mid 40s. And right around your mid 40s too, for your younger listeners, is right about the time when you start contemplating replacing parts. Like,
Oh
my
God.
carburetor's feeling a little sticky. I'm going to see about getting a new one. So right before the pandemic struck. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but in December of 2019, we came home from the Make Yourself tour, which
Yeah.
we were celebrating 20 years of Make Yourself. We did this big tour across the states, and we were supposed to come to the UK early
Yeah,
2020.
sadly. We'll get you over here
We're
at some point, man. We'll get
Yeah,
you over here.
we'll be back, I promise. But right at the end of 2019, in December, I scheduled a a procedure, we'll call it, that I'd been putting off for some time just because I never had time to do it. So I had an interesting childhood. My nose was broken twice as a kid, and like before I started singing. So I learned to sing and had my entire career as a professional singer on one functioning nostril.
Wow.
Um,
Wow, wow,
so
wow.
it, I'm sure it had something to do with like the tone of my voice, but anyway, long story short, I had my septum was so badly deviated. And it was, as we grow, there are a couple of things in our bodies that never stop growing. So our noses and our ears being the ones, I'm sure you've heard the old tales, our noses and our ears never stop growing through our lives. That's how we get that classic like old man look, right?
Right.
But as my nose continues to grow, my septum was continuing to deviate, making it harder and harder for me to breathe and therefore sing. So I've been kind of struggling for like the past like 7 years, off and on. And I'm sure like hardcore fans out there have come to a lot of shows, have been like, having an off night tonight. I could feel it. So I finally bit the bullet. I had my septum repaired.
Wow.
And so I can breathe now. But what they didn't tell me was that there was going to be a learning curve in
Yeah.
getting your comfort zone and your voice back. And it kind of just came back. So it's been a really interesting process. I am kind of right back at like 98% now, which is so exciting for me because I have like my full breath capacity and my full voice capacity back. So I'm actually really excited to go out and sing at the top of my lungs with a lot of people.
Man, that's incredible news, man. Congratulations on that. It's got to be such a
Thanks.
relief in a lot of ways. I know it's a weird thing to say congratulations for, but you know what I mean? It must be a real relief
Yeah.
and feel almost like a new instrument in a way. You've got to like, completely change up the way you do things in a way. Having said that, doing it all on one nostril all these years, that's a hell of a bit of breath control you've had on stage, my man. That's
Right.
pretty damn impressive right there, dude.
Right. Let me just tell you too, the world is a very different place when you have two functioning nostrils. Your sort of olfactory capacities go up about 50%. All of a sudden I'm like, one of you fuckers farted in here for sure. I know it.
Oh,
Like
dude.
I didn't, like I know it. I know it.
Dude, when you get back in those sweaty venues again, your senses are going to be
Exactly.
going nuts. That's going to be wild.
Point out like
Um,
the thousandth person and like you, I know it was you.
yeah, properly pointing them out, picking them out of
Yeah.
a crowd. Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the band, of course, as well, because you guys were actually quite busy in a couple of ways during the pandemic. We've got to mention this Morning View stuff because, I mean, first of all, in terms of the anniversary of that album, what I always like to ask people when these anniversaries roll around is not so much what's changed because we can see that through watching a band's career, but what
Yeah.
did stay the same from that moment. Is there anything you
Mm,
learned making that record in particular that stuck with you as you've gone on to other creative projects, both on your own and with the band?
that's an interesting question. There are some sort of like obvious things like it was right around that record. It started to creep into my writing process. And I think there are other guys in the band as well around Make Yourself, but really kind of coalesced during the Morning View writing process. And we started to learn about like economy of space. And we started to learn about moments between notes, like subtext almost. And it was it was like an enlightenment moment for me as a songwriter. I was really paying attention to some of my favorite songwriters in that moment and noticing all of the things that weren't being said, but that were being implied. And this is both kind of literally from a lyrical standpoint, but also from a musical standpoint, the spaces in between the notes. And I think that the Morning View experience, part of that revelation was literally the space that we were in, this giant like orchestral living room with really high ceilings, and it wasn't necessarily made for a rock band. But I remember distinctly when we were writing Morning View, the way that Jose's snare would sound when he would strike it. and the way that it would off of the ceiling and wrap back around. And when we got back into the Morning View house to do that live stream, we set up his drums and he started playing, and it was exactly the same. It was right there, the same thing. And it kind of rushed back into my consciousness. It was like, whoa, this room had a lot to do with how we have evolved as a band. And as we know, we've moved into like smaller, more sort of tight rooms. We tend to write more busy, note-filled music, which is really fun to do. But I think my most favorite songs and material that we've ever written as a band are the ones that have this sort of economy of space in them. Where they're and they sound better in like arenas. It's a really interesting phenomenon, you know, like those more busy kind of frenetic songs sound really great in these tight little clubs that we'll play in sometimes, which is a really cool experience. But then we go to certain places in the world, we can fill up a gigantic room with human beings, and it's a blessing. And when we play tracks from Morning View and certain tracks that have that more like spacious, atmospheric sensibility about them, they sound better in those giant rooms. So that's something that stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's an album that's, watch it in widescreen in a way. It's just a big,
Mm-hmm.
big, epic kind of, yeah, I like the idea of the space in between the notes, especially on that record. And you mentioned, of course, yeah, you did return to the house. And, any Incubus fan, I think, is very aware of what that house meant to you and meant for that record. I think it was on MTV Cribs at one point, if I remember correctly. It's going right back, really showing
Yeah.
my age there, but it's really going right back on that one. But it must have been such an amazing experience. It's great to hear that there was certain musical aspects about that house that kind of did remain the same. But what were your first impressions when you went back in there? Did the rest of it kind of feel the same? Did memories flood back, or has it been radically changed since you guys took it over?
No, it looks identical.
Wow.
Um, the only thing that was different when we went back in there was they had a grotto outside. It was like this waterfall thing, kind of adjacent to the pool, and it was where all of the frogs would gather every night when we were there and just go into this like 1,000 frog chorus from the minute the sun went down, and it would last all night. And that's where we got the frog song at the end of Aqueous Transmission. We literally hung a microphone out of the balcony window because we tried to just go out there and like hold the microphone towards the grotto where the frogs were and capture them. But every time we go out there with a mic, every single one of them would stop talking. Like they were like, no pictures, So we sneakily like hung this microphone, slowly like dropped it down over a balcony, and then waited until we just pushed play and record. And we left it on overnight. We have probably 10 or 12 hours worth of those frogs. But so we went back there to do this live stream, and the grotto was all dried up. It was kind of sad in a way. But yeah. It's mostly wonderful memories about that house. The thing that I don't love is that the owner kind of, after we left there, we were the first band to go in there and make a record. And after we left, he like just super callously exploited our name and used it. He turned it into kind of like a recording salon, and a bunch of people made records in there. Some of them, friends of ours, been recorded, which is awesome. I just don't love the way that the owner of the house like really kind of just callously exploited us to sell his place, but I suppose it's to be expected. This is America. It's like,
Yeah, when you put it like that, yeah, I suppose.
Sort
Yeah,
of what
I
we
suppose
do
so.
over here, I suppose. Just a humble critique of my culture.
Absolutely, always humble, keeping it humble. I want to mention, of course, what might be next for the band. We know that you got the tour coming up, of course. Have you guys had much time really over the last few months to kind of get back into writing and think about what's next? And also, I suppose, how has your solo experience impacted what might come next? Is there anything you learned from that you feel is going to feed into what's going to come next from Incubus too?
Well, we've been, like I said, we've been rehearsing quite a lot, just reacquainting ourselves with our catalog, and it's super fun to be around each other too. These are guys that Mikey and Jose, I mean, I've grown up with them since I was a little kid. And so when we get into the room together, there's the adult part of us that shows up and everything, but there's still like the 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old versions of us that have never really left. I think it's one of the reasons why we are still in the band together, because music represents a kind of a child in us that refuses to grow up. There's this, it's almost like this like creative Peter Panism or something, that exists between us that is really like, it's always fun. Like we have fun like 98.9% of the time. Even when we have a terrible show, we're able to kind of like laugh about it. Like, wow, that sucked. At least we have tomorrow, that kind of thing. But yeah, the solo thing in regards to Incubus, it's, 10 years ago, like when I first started putting out 10 or 11 years ago, when I first started putting out solo records, I could feel like the slightest bit of tension around the idea, around my need to be more kind of, non-monogamous, for lack of a better way of describing it, and since then it's become much more supportive, because everybody over the years has their distinctive, unique creative voices. And I think as we grow up, we've learned that creativity is not something that enjoys being harnessed. Creativity doesn't like when you put like shackles on it. You can do that, and sometimes it works for certain people. But for me, and I think for the guys in the band too, the more we are free individually to explore our creative lives, the more it inspires us to sort of return to this, we call it our mothership. Incubus is the mothership. And we go off on our little, satellite ships off into different parts of the universe and gather material and ideas and stuff. And then we come back and it's like, ooh, look what I found out there in Alpha Centauri. This is awesome, right? And sometimes they're like, yeah, that's awesome. And sometimes they're like, that's fucking garbage. Let's just play our songs. So.
Good to see. There's always going to be naturally some kind of effect there, though, man. That's nice to see. Yeah. I'm intrigued to see what you guys do next. Brandon, I know you've got to go shortly, so I'll leave you with this. It's the £1 million question for fans like me over on this side of the Atlantic. We know you were meant to come over for the Make Yourself shows. Understandably, didn't end up happening. Are there plans in place? Are there thoughts moving forward about some kind of possible UK return, hopefully sooner rather than later?
There are thoughts that are so fully cooked that we are actually on the brink of making plans. I'm sorry if that sounds super vague, but it's still, even though the pandemic seems to be, oh God, and science willing,
touch wood,
I hope that it is sort of receding, fading into the background. But it's still not as easy as like, let's go.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's still tricky times for touring.
It's still a little tricky. There's even just the brass tacks of it. Like if we go over there and one of us gets COVID and we have to cancel shows, it would break the bank, if you're traveling that far with your crew and your gear and all that stuff. So like I said, the thoughts are so fully formed that they're turning into plans. So It'll be in the not too distant future that we come back to the UK.
Glad to hear it, man. Glad to hear it. Well, in the meantime, enjoy this big summer tour. Congrats again on the solo record that people can go and hear right now, of course. And best of luck with rehearsals and everything. Do me a favor, throw Anti-Gravity Love Song in the Incubus Challenge tomorrow, please. I'd like that.
I absolutely will.
Thank you very much. Let me know how it gets on. I want to hear that. And take care of yourself. We'll catch you soon, all right?
Thank you so much, man.
All right, Brandon Boyd, everybody.